I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the fourth statewide media briefing on PFAS in South Carolina. So far, we've covered testing efforts and sampling results in drinking water, surface water, and examined the EPA's proposed maximum contaminant level for PFAS. Those briefings are all available online in full on the website, and the link is provided already in the chat. Today's briefing will focus on the results so far of our PFAS sampling for well water that's used for drinking purposes. Today, we'll have three agency experts speaking about this important subject, beginning with Bureau Water Chief Jennifer Hughes, followed by Fran Marshall, Director of the Office of Environmental Public Health, and then Ray Hollenberger, an Environmental Risk Specialist. Following their comments, we'll open it up for pre-submitted questions and then your questions. Jennifer, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Ron, and good morning. And we thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. You, our media partners, we really appreciate all your support in helping us with our goal of being a trusted source of information for communities across the state who might be at risk of exposure to PFAS, either through the environment or through consumer products. The purpose of these briefings is to share the latest information about PFAS. Over the past year, we have done several briefings. The first was on the EPA's proposed drinking water standards for 6 PFAS chemicals. And remember, PFAS refers to a class of chemicals which has over 9,000 compounds. And as an update, we are still waiting for EPA's proposed drinking water standards to be finalized. Also, during our previous briefings, we have shared with you the data from our drinking water strategy, and we have also briefed on our ambient surface water strategy. And we have shared that data on a quarterly basis over the past year. As an update to that project, at the end of last year, we completed the sampling, and we have recently finalized a summary report for the ambient surface water strategy, and it will be available on our webpage after today's briefing. For today's briefing, we would like to share with you our efforts related to private drinking water wells in South Carolina. We recognize that you, our media partners, have an important role in helping us keep our citizens informed about the topics that are of interest and that have the potential to affect them. DHEC is partnering with you and with the hope that accurate, timely information can reach every South Carolinian. For us to understand the risk to communities, we have to have a good understanding of the state and transport of these chemicals, and that's what we've been focused on. And at the end of the day, the data will inform the direction we go as a state, and that's the information we share with you, our citizens, our stakeholders and partners and leaders. It's not just a DHEC regulatory issue, but a state of South Carolina issue. So it's important to have everyone engaged as we continue to move forward. As we have stated, tackling PFAS in our environment continues to be one of the most complex, challenging issues the states across the country are tackling today, and it really is a global issue. South Carolina's approach since day one has been and continues to be driven by science and data. The data is helping us better understand how these chemicals are finding their way into our environment and how citizens may be exposed to them. Again, today our focus is on private drinking water wells in our state. So I'm going to ask Fran Marshall, the Director of Environmental and Public Health, to make some comments, and then looking forward to hearing from Ray, who is our Environmental Risk Specialist, who has taken the lead and has been very involved in collecting private well samples. So Fran, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer said, we're committed to sharing our data and information, and we really appreciate your assistance with passing it on to your audiences. We want people to be informed but not afraid. As you may or not be aware, apart from the initial permit to construct a private drinking water well, no agency regulates the actual use of the well. We do have outreach materials to help well owners understand what should be done to maintain their wells through disinfecting them, and we also help to remediate groundwater contamination that is found to impact private drinking water wells. In fact, one of the first steps in assessing any known spill or release or discovery of a contaminated site is to look for any and all private drinking water wells in the area and then taking the appropriate action. Unlike some chemical contaminants, PFAS chemicals do not have an effect on taste, and they don't affect the color of the water or even have an odor in the water. The only way to determine their presence or absence is to sample the water. In 2022, the legislature provided us with a $10 million proviso for use on PFAS-related projects and data collection. That has allowed us to begin assessing the fate and transport of this class of chemicals in our state, as Jennifer mentioned. A part of what this proviso has funded and is funding is also the sampling of private wells. As you may recall from our previous briefing, these chemicals were developed in the 30s and 40s and are used in a variety of consumer products, including wrinkle and stain-resistant fabrics that would include clothes, furniture, carpet, car seats. They're used in cosmetics, food wrappers, and more. The EPA states that an estimated 20% of our exposure comes from drinking water and around 80% comes from other sources, to include those I've just mentioned. Let me remind you also that bottled water is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, and currently there is no requirement to test for PFAS compounds in bottled water. I will now turn it over to our environmental risk specialist, Ray Holberger, to share with you some more about our private well program. And after Ray's brief presentation, we will field any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. I'm going to be putting up some slides here. Great. So the private well sampling program has been going on for just over a year now, and we've already sampled more than 350 wells. We're focused on places we think groundwater might be more vulnerable.
Not changing on the screen, sorry.
Apologies, everyone. Okay. We're focusing on places we think groundwater might be more vulnerable to PFAS impacts. The good news is that no PFAS were detected in more than 50% of the samples we've collected so far. PFAS appear to be less prevalent in South Carolina's groundwater than in the state's surface waters. Each sample is analyzed for 25 of the most commonly detected PFAS using an EPA-approved drinking water method. Our sampling strategy is based on identifying areas of interest near potential PFAS sources in vulnerable aquifers like the highly permeable sandhills and in the middle of the state and the Piedmont's shallow fractured bedrock aquifers. We also prioritize places where results from surface water or other groundwater samples suggest that well water might be impacted. Our sampling quality assurance plan describes the project's organization, procedures, and analytical methods, like how we're using the EPA's risk-based regional screening levels as our project screening levels. We're using the RSLs because there are currently no nationwide drinking water standards for PFAS under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and we want to be consistent with the levels used in the state's EPA-led Superfund projects, like the Galey and Lord investigation, and the Department of Defense's well water investigations. The Galey and Lord investigation is a separate project that also involves private well sampling, focused in Darlington County. If you have any questions about the Galey and Lord project, we can direct you to the right people. Now, the regional screening levels, the RSLs, there are regional screening levels, RSLs, for 8 PFAS chemicals. The RSLs range from 19 parts per trillion for Gen X chemicals, which we haven't detected in well water at all, 40 parts per trillion for PFAS, 60 parts per trillion for PFOA, and up to 18,000 parts per trillion for PFBA, all of which we detect more frequently. We're using a number of different methods to get the word out about our well water sampling project. We've created an internet request form on our PFAS website where South Carolina residents can sign up to be considered for a free PFAS well water sample. We prioritize web requests that come in from places near our areas of interest. So far, we've received 271 requests, and we've fulfilled 249, so almost all of them. We use several other outreach techniques to advertise the project in areas of interest that we've prioritized. Sampling teams will go door to door and ask residents if they're interested in a free well water sample. Most people we approach this way actually would like to participate in our program. We also leave flyers in door hangers with links to our web form and contact information. We get responses from about 5% of the residents whose doors we leave flyers on. In addition, we've partnered with the Conservation Voters of South Carolina to make social media ad buys in the areas we prioritize. The early results from these efforts are encouraging. Lastly, we're in the process of sending out postcards advertising the project to areas of interest across the state. The results from the first year of sampling show that we haven't detected any of the 25 PFAS in more than 50% of the residential wells we've sampled. It's important to remember that we're trying to sample places we think will find PFAS. These results don't represent overall well water concentrations in the state, only in the areas we've prioritized. The residential well results, along with the public groundwater supply well PFAS data, demonstrate that PFAS are less prevalent in South Carolina's groundwaters than they are in the state's surface waters, where we detect some PFAS in nearly every sample we've collected. Other states that have sampled residential wells have generally shown the same trend. That said, there are a few places, especially in the vulnerable groundwater aquifers in the central part of the state, like the Sandhills and the Piedmont, that have elevated well water PFAS concentrations. The results can be quite variable, with some samples showing elevated PFAS levels, while samples from nearby wells have low or no detectable concentrations. 7 private well samples we've collected had concentrations of PFAS, usually PFAS and occasionally PFOA, greater than our project screening levels. We're still working out what the potential sources of the PFAS impacts might be in these areas. Curiously, we're not finding PFAS in some of the places we expected to, such as near bioresidual land application sites, like we did near the Gailey and Lord land application fields. We communicate all results above our screening levels to residents as soon as we receive them, either by phone or in person. We provide a point-of-use faucet or pitcher filter certified to reduce PFAS concentrations in water, and we also discuss other ways to reduce PFAS exposures. We work with local public water services in areas with several PFAS-impacted wells to try to extend water lines and provide access to public water supplies. South Carolina DHEC has been one of the most proactive state agencies nationwide in the assessment of PFAS contamination in drinking water. We remain committed to providing these services to South Carolina residents and communicating the results. Anyone whose drinking water comes from a residential well can sign up to be considered for a free PFAS sample. With that, I'll hand the meeting back to Jennifer for some closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray and Fran, for sharing the private well information. In closing, even though PFAS is a very complex and challenging issue, DHEC is committed to executing our multimedia strategies with a holistic approach and using the science and data to drive our path forward, and most importantly, sharing the data and information with everyone. As I previously mentioned, we have recently finalized a summary report for our ambient surface water strategy. It will be available on our webpage today. Again, thank you for your participation in today's briefing and in helping us inform the citizens we serve. We look forward to sharing additional PFAS updates with you in the near future. Ron, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentations today, Ray, Fran, and Jennifer. We have some pre-submitted questions that we'll get to first before we open it up to a regular Q&A. The first pre-submitted questions that we have from the Sumter item. The first question is, are there any specific areas or counties within South Carolina that are at a higher risk for PFAS contamination in private wells? Ray?
Thanks, Ron. So like I mentioned, we're detecting more PFAS in private wells in the middle of the state. Unfortunately, right here in Richland County and in Lexington County, to some degree in Sumter, all clustered near the Sandhills region. There are other parts of the state where we haven't detected much at all, like Horry County in the Low Country, and we've also detected a number of elevated concentrations in York County. So it's hard to say what exactly these sources are. They don't tend to be very obvious, but we're working on trying to elucidate what's going on.
Thank you, Ray. Our second question is, what actions should homeowners take if PFAS contamination is detected in their well water?
The saving grace about PFAS contamination in private well water or any kind of drinking water is that there are a number of readily available carbon filtration systems that do a great job at reducing concentrations down to undetectable levels if used properly. We've been distributing point of use and pitcher filters. There are a number of other refrigerator filters that also fit the bill. We recommend that residents concerned about PFAS in their drinking water purchase a carbon filter that is certified by the NSF to reduce PFAS, that is PFAS or PFOA concentrations.
Hey, Ray, you can remain with your camera on there. This is kind of a similar question. You touched on this a minute. How will these results be communicated to well owners, and what supportive resources will be provided?
So all elevated concentrations above our screening levels are communicated immediately to residents by phone or in person if I can't reach them by the phone. And all of the others are being emailed out to people who've participated in our project. And if concentrations are elevated above our screening levels, we provide a point of use filter, as I mentioned, and other concentrations between our screening levels and our detection limits engender a discussion about potential ways to reduce one's exposures through the use of filters, as I mentioned.
Thank you, Ray. Fran, I believe this one's going to be for you. What are the recommended exposure limits for PFAS in drinking water, and do they relate to potential health risks?
Thanks, Ron. Currently, there are no nationwide exposure limits. We have exposure guidelines, and Ray mentioned the risk screening levels that we're currently using. There is a proposed drinking water standard from EPA, and it's important to remember that MCLs, or drinking water standards, are set assuming that you drink 2.5 liters a day for 70 years from the same source. And they're also protective of the most sensitive population. So these are chronic, long-term standards, not instantaneous or short-term standards. They also are protective of the most sensitive populations.
Thank you, Fran. We have questions now from WIS. I think this is going to be for Doug Kynard. What is the impact of PFAS in our water supply? How does it affect drinkers? And if you could, just give us maybe what the latest is on the EPA's proposed MCL.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Yes, in the PFAS testing that we did of all our community water systems in the state over the last 4 years, we found detections of PFOA or PFOS in approximately 45% of water systems that treat surface water and approximately 5% of public drinking water wells. That translates to, out of 878 public drinking water wells we tested, 46 of those had PFOA or PFOS levels above 4 parts per trillion. We haven't heard anything recently from EPA about the proposed PFAS rule, but we do expect it to become final sometime in 2024.
Thank you for that answer, Doug. The next question that we have, how many people in South Carolina get their water from private drinking wells? Doug, you want to take that one also?
It's, at best, it's an estimate. We think probably around 1 million people, which about 20% of the population, gets water from private wells.
All right, thank you. Our next question, how do the levels of PFAS in South Carolina's private drinking wells fare compared to other states? Jennifer?
As we mentioned, this private well strategy we are still collecting data, so we are still out and about trying to get more information about the private wells in our state. And, you know, it's still early where we don't have a lot of the comparisons to compare South Carolina with other states. But that's as the science evolves and as the data evolves, we'll have more kind of information on that front.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then the last question that we have, Ray, we will go to you. What is the state doing to mitigate PFAS in residents' drinking water? You've hit on this a few times, but I think it bears repeating.
Yeah, I can't stress enough times that if South Carolina residents or anyone else is concerned about potential PFAS in their drinking water, the correct use of a pitcher or point of use or a more expensive water filter does a great job at bringing the concentrations right down.
All right, thank you for that. Those are all the pre-submitted questions that we have. Before I throw it open to our open Q&A session, I just want to remind everyone that the purpose of the briefing is to inform and educate the public on PFAS sampling in private drinking water wells. So please keep your questions to that topic. Any of the questions you may have, you can send it to us at media@dhec.sc.gov. If you have a question, please raise your virtual hand, and I'll recognize you in the order in which you raise it. If you have any follow-ups, out of fairness, please let me get to those who have raised the questions first, and I'll come back to you. And I'll also add before we begin that a recording of today's briefing will be available today on our agency's YouTube page. So questions are open. Vincent, go ahead, sir. Vincent, I think you're still muted. Okay.
Okay. Send the chat, can't see it.
Let's see. Thank you, Vincent. Yes. How can folks with private wells request DHEC sample their well?
If anyone would like their well sampled for PFAS, just type in DHEC PFAS assessment or sampling and fill out the web form that it brings you to. You'll be on our list, and we'll reach back out to you.
Thank you for that question, Vincent. Sammy, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, can you guys hear me all right?
Sure can.
Yeah, okay. I had a question about the 4 parts per trillion standard that's not final. Do you know in your testing how many of these wells that had PFAS were above 4 but below the 40 and 60?
Thanks, Sammy. So far, we've got 60 wells that are above the 4 parts per trillion for PFAS and or PFOA. That's a little bit less than 20%, and most of these, or at least many of these, are right around the 4 parts per trillion.
Great.
Yeah, can you follow up, Sammy?
Yeah, I had one other question I had is as far as the, just to make clear, how many wells actually had levels of PFAS showing up at all versus how many wells were completely clean? Not just samples, but wells.
Thanks, Sammy. The sample numbers that we've provided to you all in our fact sheets and the slides that I just showed are actually wells that were sampled. So those aren't total wells. Those aren't total samples, including all of our QA samples and any resamples. Those are all the number of wells sampled that we've sampled. And unfortunately, they're not up to date as we've collected 20 more samples since we've published those. But it's over 350 wells sampled, and then about 50% of those had some detection.
So somewhere around 150 or whatever it is would be wells with detections in them, right?
In that ballpark, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. I'll let you move on. There were some well samples that have been provided to me at sometime in the past that showed 46 wells over in at one time in the PD in Darlington County that had PFAS, and 30 of those showed up above the 4 parts per trillion standard. Is that separate from this set of results you're releasing today, or does that include that?
That's correct, Sammy. Those were Gailey and Lord investigation samples. Those are separate from our current project. That was the EPA-led removal action associated with the Gailey and Lord site. So that is a separate, although adjacent project.
Great, thank you.
Do we have any questions from any other media members today? Right. Seeing none, I want to thank you, Jennifer, Ray, and Fran, also Doug, for y'all's time today in educating the public on this very important issue. I want to thank all of our media partners for being here. We rely on you to educate the public about this issue. If you have any further questions after this briefing, you can email us again at media@dhec.sc.gov. And as I also mentioned, a recording of this will be available on our website. I want to thank everybody for your time today, and we'll see you next time.